The following program contains the opinions of the host, guests, and call-in participants. These do not necessarily represent the views of this show's distributors or sponsors. This program may contain obscene, profane, or otherwise objectionable language. Viewer discretion is advised. Yes, it's me, my love. So nice to see you again. Coming to you cordless. It's Thursday night, March 20th, 2025. It's 9 p.m. on the East Coast of the United States, 6 p.m. on the West Coast, 8 a.m. in Singapore, 12 noon in Sydney, Australia. Don't know if that's right. Got to check again. Forgot to check. Here where I'm sitting in Northeast Minneapolis, it's 8 p.m. Central Daylight Time. I am Jim Peters, and welcome to another edition of Jim Peters at Night. This is episode 212, if I'm correct. I had to do some quick figuring in my mind there, and my mind can still figure. Who would have known that? So, how you doing? Hope you had a good day. First day of spring in the northern hemisphere, and here in Minnesota, it kind of seems like it. We had another 50-degree day here today. We have no snow on the ground at all, completely gone. And meanwhile, in Pensacola, Florida, of all places, in Pensacola, they got a foot of snow. What? How does that work? Now, I should say this. I should tell you. Here in Minneapolis, it did not snow last night. 90 miles south of here in Rochester, Minnesota, the home of the Mayo Clinic, they got about a foot. It snowed pretty bad, but we're at the very, very edge of that storm system. We didn't get any snow here at all. Not even a trace. Nothing. Got it. Yeah. Yeah, Rochester's an interesting place. People don't, think the Mayo Clinic, well, it's in Minnesota. They assume it's in Minneapolis. It isn't. Rochester's a very relatively small town. It's about 100,000 people, and I hate to say it, the only real thing there is a Mayo Clinic, and the majority of that town is populated by doctors and medical personnel. Almost all of it. They live there because that's where the clinic is, and the clinic pretty much overruns the entirety of downtown. There are skyscrapers in downtown Rochester, Minnesota, but they all belong to the clinic. And from what I understand privately, a good friend of mine was actually worked in upper management there at Mayo, and he told me that they basically rue the day they built their clinic in this tiny little town. They're 90 miles and 90 minutes outside of downtown Minneapolis. So there you go. Little detail there. I thought you'd want to know. Tonight, our guest is Leigh Richardson. She's back for her second interview of three that she's doing. Three Thursday nights in a row. This is the second one. We're talking about her book, Crisis Brains: Unlocking Brain Capital for Smarter Decisions. And tonight we're talking about what brain capital actually is, and she's going to tell us that and give us some examples and how to increase yours. Now, the book is ostensibly for business leaders, but as she points out, and I don't need to tell you this, everybody's a business leader because you're the leader of your own life. So therefore, you can use this too. So this is a second one. Next Thursday, she's coming on for the last one. We might do that episode live. I've been talking to her. This one was taped on Saturday afternoon, and we had to because she was going out of town. She's going to do it tonight, or today. I mean, as a general rule, even our pre-recorded interviews are done the afternoon in the air, so they're only I don't want to. If there's any breaking news, we usually can cover it. I mean, usually 3 hours doesn't make that much of a difference. So, but this one we did a few days ahead of time because we had to. On next Thursday, she might do it live because we might take your questions. Now, you'll see at the bottom of this screen here, we have a ticker, and you can call me after the interview's done. 325-CALL-JIM, 325-225-5546, or you can leave me a text message. You can send me a text message because I will get it in real time. Got a little screen over here off to the side. And that's 408-458-5088. As a matter of fact, if you have questions for Leigh for the last interview, I'd suggest you either text them to me or call them in after the show. Excuse me, because I can't. You can call me, but I can't answer them because I don't know. I don't know shit. I don't know. It's like that's the reason I do this. That's the reason we talk to really interesting people because I don't know crap. That's the reason. So, but if you have a question for you because anything you call in on the 325 call Jim number, when we're not on the air or on the tube or whatever you want to call it, uh, you get recorded. You can leave a message, voicemail up to 2 minutes, and I do get those, all of them. Yeah, who knows what this is called? We started this show about 19 months ago when live, I guess this is a live podcast, I guess, but no one had a word for it 19 months ago because not many people were doing live broadcasting then when we started this. Now it's quite common. I don't have to tell you, but there's never been a real term for what we're doing here. Now, obviously, when we're done, YouTube, Rumble, and all the other places we broadcast, they immediately post the file as an archive, and I won't kid you, the vast majority of people who watch the show watch it on demand. They do not watch it live. We have relatively few live watchers, viewers, but that's fine. I got to do it sometime anyway, and I like doing it live because I like taking your phone calls. Last night we did an all open phone show. Santa called. Santa called from Dubai, where he's on vacation. I told him he didn't know what I was talking about. I told him to go to the Dubai Mall. It's great, apparently. I've never been there, but yeah, supposedly it's fantastic. And Think called in. We always have a great conversation with him. And yeah, we started talking about what all pervy men do, and that I almost got in trouble. Not quite. We are lucky here. We don't have to deal with the FCC rules. We don't, which is the reason I can say all the dirty words, and I do. If I have a potty mouth. I do in real life, and it's terrible. You know, considering the stuff I've done, people say you should talk better. Yeah, I should, but I don't. I don't. Well, I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know if I'm on the spectrum or what the deal is, but yeah, something's going on there. That probably isn't good. So, yeah, but I like to talk to the people. We have really good guests on the show. Steve Mera was on Tuesday. He's a legitimate A-level guest, A-list guest. He's been on every damn Ancient Alien and UFO show you've ever seen. I mean, this guy totally gets around. And I brought this up to him, and he mentioned it. And the thing is, and it's true. I said, Steve, it's obvious you're easy to get along with because so many people want your work, and he's working constantly. I don't even see where he gets the time. I don't where he gets the time to sleep. I don't understand. I don't get it. But yeah, he's around, and we had a fantastic conversation with him. And if you watch that, if you're into paranormal at all, I highly suggest you do, because toward the end of that interview, he starts talking about the fact that it's not just that a lot of these things seem related, and they do, and a lot of these things are unexplainable so far, and they are. But that said, we're dealing with something here that we don't really understand. And I mean, that seems like Captain Obvious stuff, but no, it really isn't, because I mentioned this during the interview with him. David Grush, the guy who appeared before the UAP congressional panels, excuse me, I burp a lot. It's been Jazz Shaw, our late great friend. He pointed this out many times about the fact that Grush never has actually used the term extraterrestrial. And Jazz knew David Grush and actually asked him about this. And he said, well, I don't say extraterrestrial because there's a good possibility it's not extraterrestrial. Then what is it? It's interdimensional. And Mira and I talked about that. And, he said, and the problem with that is that it's really hard to wrap your mind around that. If you're, the average person going to work every day, and raising your kids, and trying to get your kids through college or whatever the hell it is, God, don't send them to Columbia. But that's another thing. If you're that person, it's really hard to wrap your mind around. First of all, what is interdimensionality? It's like we have some idea. We're not sure. It's just like the physics of this stuff. Okay, we have crash extraterrestrial spacecraft. I'm going to talk about that in part 2 of the show after the interview too. We don't necessarily know what these things are, how they work. But even though we have them, anyway, Steve and I had a fantastic conversation. I'm looking to have him on again. The irony is we talked for about 80 minutes. We never got around to talking about the actual thing that I wanted to talk to him about, which was his book. And it's called, what is it called? uh, Fires and Whispers, I think it's called, if I'm right. I bought it. I'm reading it. I can't remember because everything I do now blends together. I can't keep track of anything. Anyway, so yeah, we're gonna play the interview we did with Leigh Richardson on Saturday, and then we're gonna come back with part two, and I'll take your calls in part two. We're gonna leave the ticker on the screen, but if you call during the interview, you won't get on the air, and I can't even pick it up. I can't. But we'll just take your calls for part two. So that said, here's a commercial from Car News, and we'll be back with Leigh Richardson. Hi, all. Jim Peters again for Conk News. Let me tell you one of the greatest things about Conk News. It's free. It's completely and totally free. You don't need to register. You don't need to log in, subscribe, none of that stuff. Sure, they run a few ads on the front page, but if you're an old fogey like me, you might actually appreciate this because when you check out Conk News at conk.com, you'll probably notice that it's the closest thing to an old-fashioned hard copy newspaper that you'll find online. The latest up-to-the-minute news from 75 high-quality sources collected every 3 hours, all laid out with photos and headlines directly from the articles. And when you click on a story, you go directly to that story. No ad page, no interstitial page, none of that stuff. This is the way online news is meant to be. And did I mention that it's completely free? Seriously, how much of stuff in America is free now, right? That's of quality anyway. So check this out for yourself. It's at conk.com, CONK.com. Conk News. Joining us once again from our office in Dallas, Texas. It's the founder of the Brain Performance Center and the Brain Performance Institute, psychologist Dr. Leigh Richardson. Hi, Leigh. How are you doing today?
Hi, Jim. I'm doing great. Great to be back with you.
Yeah, it was very nice too. We had a lot of fun last Thursday, and we're going to have a lot of fun right now. And so, what I want to address ASAP is the name of your book is Jesus. I better reread it because I'm not gonna. It's the subtitle I'm interested in. The name of your book is Brain Crisis Brains: Unlocking Brain Capital for Smarter Decisions. And my first question today is, what is brain capital?
Well, brain capital, really, it's based off of your cognitive, your emotional, and your social resilience. But it's more than that. You have to be able to be adaptable. And because if you're not adaptable, you don't have the ability to be agile and to pivot. And you got to be able to tolerate stress in today's world. All leaders are going to have a stress component that they have to manage.
So you said it's a combination of cognitive, emotional, and what? What was that?
Social.
And social. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the if you're talking about like cognitive function, or actually what I was going to say is how does this relate to actually pragmatism?
Well, pragmatism, that relates more to me how you analyze it, how you break it apart, and how you perceive it. And with brain capital, that's all part of it. But brain capital, brain's capital ability is you can process, you can adapt, and then you can take that information and you can act in a leadership role from it.
If we're going to go into the assumption like we did for the previous installment here, that basically everybody's a leader, even if it's just in their own lives, why does brain capital matter?
Because everybody, regardless of what you're doing in your own life, you're in an information overload. We're fatigued. Our workplace stress is at an all-time high. And if we don't have brain capital and we find ourselves in a challenging situation, which we all do at some point, even during the week, we don't solve the problems. We don't make the right decisions. And then we end up frustrated and down on ourselves and with bigger consequences that may impact our family, our friends, or our team.
This gets to I've told you in the past I was involved in classical music, and this gets to I'm hinting at something here, but first I want to ask you, what makes some people more resilient than others? Do you have any idea?
I do. I think it comes from your life experiences, what you've been through. There's four things that puts a brain in a dysregulated state: genetics, physical head trauma, emotional trauma, and stress. And I think all of that plays into your brain's ability to be regulated, plays to your ability to be resilient.
I'm going to throw out an idea here because from classical music. So I studied with a very famous composition teacher named Alfred Reed, and he always said that he thought that what encompassed talent was 60% environmental factors and 40% internal, for lack of a better term, talent or ability. Do you have any thoughts on this? How does this relate to what you're talking about, or does it? I don't even know.
Well, I think it absolutely does, because the environment that we're operating in influences the lifestyle choices that we have access to. And for someone, think back in the pandemic, COVID. I mean, supply chain, all the problems that we all had. Never in my life would I thought a roll of toilet paper would be the most valuable thing in the house. So the environment that you're operating. And next to that was a bottle of bleach. Who would have known?
Yeah, really.
So I do think the environment that you're in plays very heavily into it. And then what's going on in your head always influences your ability to respond, whether or not you respond with impulsively or with thought. That's based on your internal matters.
I have a theory that I'm going to share with you here, and you tell me if this is pertinent to the situation or not. I have this theory that everyone's life is made up of what I call episodes. And what I mean by an episode is basically some sort of negotiation. Like for most people, it's getting a job, right? And I think some people's, for lack of a better term, wisdom, or I think what you would call it emotional intelligence, is partly based on how many of those things you go through. Because the thing, it's like everyone wants to think, well, everyone's the same. But the fact, especially is when you get older, some people actually just do more living than others. I mean, I don't know how to put that. I mean, it's like I had lunch with my mother yesterday. She's 100 years old. Now she just moved in an assisted living facility, and she's not bragging here. I know she's right. She had to hide from the Nazis and all that sort of stuff. I mean, she's had a very, very interesting life. And she says that, that most of the people that she's around, they don't really do anything. And I mean, this is a really it's a touchy subject to talk about, because I'm not trying to insult any people here, but is there any credence to the fact that I'm talking about, that some people, especially as you get older, just end up doing more stuff than others?
Oh, absolutely. I have clients walk in my office and, we'll be talking about, okay, last week you said you were going to do this and this. Well, Leigh, I'm 65 now. I just can't get as much done. And that's in their head. They have changed their expectations of themselves. And we get done what we think is important and what we want to get done. And I think that some of us quit challenging ourselves, and some of us will continue to push ourselves. I hope I push myself till I'm 100.
Yeah, well, that's what my mother does, and she says the same thing. She's a great example for me, because I have to tell you, Leigh, I'm 69. I am physically, my metabolism is slowing down. It's tough. I mean, I could work 16, 20 hours a day 20 years ago. Now I'm really happy sitting watching television with my cat. I mean, I am. So, I mean, it's really, at this point, I'm actually fighting it, now we're talking about me. This is terrible.
But Jim, you represent a good portion of the population. And I think we all need to build resilience into our lives. And everybody's a leader. Everybody needs to build resilience, because it's getting tougher and tougher, and we have more challenges today than we did 20 years ago.
All right. In your book, you talk about the difference between trainable skills and innate abilities. What's the difference?
Well, I mean, I think trainable skills are something that if you try hard enough, if you do your work, if you practice, you can learn. Innate abilities ties into what intuitively feels right for you. That feeds into your inner strengths. There are things that I know I'm really good at, and there are things that I'm not so good at. And it doesn't matter how long I practice or how hard I try to train myself, I'm never going to run a 5-minute mile.
Right. Yeah. Now this is really interesting too, because like I said, in in classical music, there's the big debate, and I've dealt with a lot of musicians about the difference between like learned ability and talent. There was a very famous study that was done about maybe 15, 20 years ago now in Britain of British concert pianists, and these people, they did the psychologists, they did a very detailed study of the work lives of these people, and they came to the conclusion that the only real difference in the level of success that someone had in their professional concert pianist career basically came down to the amount they practiced. They had that there was no, and I have to say, I have noticed this too. I don't know if there's any such thing as, I mean, you are right. You know, obviously some people's personalities lead them to very quickly learn skills in certain areas. I mean, I don't think there's anything about that. But on the other hand, I'm actually starting to doubt whether like quote unquote talent actually exists. I don't know. That's like, I'm just talking, I guess, but you tell me.
I think talent does exist, but I think talent plays into your motivation and your passion.
Yeah.
And
Well, that's the other thing too. It seems like at the end of the day, the people who are most successful are the people who are basically most obsessed with what they're doing. Talking about motivation, you know?
I can't tell you how many people, Jim, asked me that question. What part of the brain does motivation come from? Could you turn that part on for me?
Yeah. Well, do you know? I don't know. Is there an answer to that question?
I think it's a whole head, you know?
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
And then there's the thing about the difference between like in regular intelligence or analytical intelligence and emotional intelligence. And I know books have been written about emotional intelligence. There's that very famous series, you know. What exactly is emotional intelligence?
Well, I mean, emotional intelligence, you're right, has become a big deal in the last decade. And it measures the ability to understand and manage emotions. And it's critical for team dynamics and communication. And it's interesting, Jim, because in my dissertation on decision making, situational awareness was a big factor. It was a reoccurring theme. And emotional intelligence is an essential component of situational awareness. Because, you know, when you say situational awareness, you're thinking about what's going on around you physically and in the environment. But with emotional intelligence, you have the ability to recognize and understand. And instead of reacting, you manage those emotions, not only in yourself, but in others.
So is emotional intelligence based on personal experience too? Or the amount of it?
Well, and part of it, I think part of it's based on what's going on in your brain. How self-aware are you? How well do you understand your own emotions? And how socially aware are you? Are you aware of other people's emotions, of their body language? Are there social cues? And a lot of times, certain populations, like the autistic population, may be less adept at following social cues. They may not even recognize them.
Yeah, but you know, that's really interesting. I'm going to go on a tangent here, if you don't mind, talking about autistic people. Is that they might be bad at social stuff, but some of them are very, very good at other things, you know?
Very, very much so. I mean, if you look at their attention to detail and the abilities that gives them in certain professions, I'll tell you a great story about that autistic population. I had a client referred in, and he was on the spectrum, and he was referred to me because he was having relationship problems. He'd only been married a year. And so he'd been in and out, quite a bit. And I saw him one day and I said, "Oh, how you doing today?" So, "Oh, I'm doing good." I said, "Well, you're either going to work or you're coming from work, because you always are every time I talk to him." And he's like, "Yep, going to work." I said, "You know what? I have no idea what you do." And he said, I said, so tell me, what do you do? And he said, well, Miss Leigh, I don't know if I'm allowed to. And I said, well, of course you're allowed to. Anything that you say to me, I run this business under the license of a counselor. And anything you say to me legally, I cannot repeat unless I have your permission. He said, okay. He said, I'm a gambler, but I'm legal, Miss Leigh. I don't cheat and I don't steal. And I said, of course you don't. I said, you're autistic. You follow patterns. You're great at gambling.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, I am. So, I mean, you're right. Everybody's got strengths that put into the right environment, they can maximize.
Yeah. So, all right. But if situational awareness is in your brain, can you learn awareness?
I think that self-awareness is harder to learn, but I think you can learn to be socially aware. I think you can be, it's just like how you learn to make a good decision. You follow the 3 steps. So I think self-awareness was the hardest because that's understanding your own emotions and then being able to regulate your responses.
Yeah, and I suppose I never thought about this, but if you're talking about situational awareness, it's kind of like being trained to be a police officer or military people. They're trained to be aware of their environment, and they're literally trained to do it. I'm going to bring something up here that you may think is nuts, but I think it might be a good example. There's a very famous thing. We do a lot of paranormal stuff on the show. There's a very famous thing that was run by the CIA in the 70s and 80s called Project Stargate, where they were trying to train people to do what's called remote viewing. Do you know what that concept is? It's when you literally can project your mind to another physical location and look around. Okay.
Yeah, it's your own virtual reality.
Yeah, but the thing is, what they've determined, and this is the part, I don't have any problem with the ability to do that. The thing I have a hard time with is they say they've gotten to the point now where they can train anybody to do this. It's not real. In other words, it's like opera singing. Some people are better at it than others, but pretty much anybody can do it. That's what they say. And I have a very hard time with that concept. I really do. I've never projected my soul anywhere.
I don't think that some people, they don't process information that way. Some people don't process on a spiritual level. So I stand in your camp.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I spent this is a million years ago. I had to train an actor how to sing, and he had never done it before, and he was basically tone deaf, and we got to the point where he could do a reasonably good job. I mean, he was never going to be Frank Sinatra ever, but he could do the musical, and that was the thing that was important. So I mean, I was very proud of that. Once again, we're talking about me. Why are we talking about me? We shouldn't be talking about me. All right. So do you have some examples of organizations that prioritize brain capital and leadership? Can you give me a few?
Well, I do. And a couple that come to mind are, look at NASA and astronaut training. I mean, astronauts aren't just trained for their technical expertise, but can you imagine the resilience that it requires to stay in a spaceship for 6 months at a time and never to walk out, breathe fresh air, pet
with
the dog.
People you don't like.
Yeah. I mean, and their training, they train them, they use simulated crisis situations so that they can develop that stress tolerance. And you got to be able to make a decision under pressure. So that's a great example of brain capital.
Leigh, did you ever hear about Biodome 2? Are you familiar with that?
Not much.
This is about 20 years ago. They put a bunch of people in the desert. They were going to simulate a colony on Mars. So I think they took like 9 people, I think it was. I don't know exactly the number about that. It was roughly a dozen or a little less. And they put them in a completely sealed facility that they were supposed to stay in for a year. No one was supposed to go in and out. They weren't supposed to get any additional food. It's basically like they were in Mars. And the really interesting thing about that, it completely failed. These people almost died.
Well, I can almost predict that.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Okay. I should have talked to you first.
I don't know about that, but look at the U.S. military special forces. and the elite military units like the Navy SEALs. I mean, they emphasize mental agility and stress resistance as much as they do physical endurance. And they actually use neuromodulation techniques. They do mindfulness training. They do cognitive flexibility exercises that enhance decision making in those high pressure situations. It's it is all about training. And finally, companies in tech, healthcare, and finance, they're starting to be future oriented, and they're starting to look at some of those same things.
In our last little talk here, you were talking about empathy. And so you just brought up NASA and the special forces. And the thing I find interesting about, especially the second example, but maybe both of them, and that is, I don't know if there's a lot of empathy involved in those training sessions. In other words, when it comes down to how important is empathy?
Well, No Soldier Left Behind, and I think there's some empathy in that. And
you got a good point. That's true. Right. Yeah.
So I do. And I think that, brain capital, it starts with that emotional intelligence. And I think, corporations and businesses, they're a lot better at that emotional intelligence than they are brain capital. But, when you think about a company and I love women leaders, and there's 2 women leaders, and I'm not a real big football fan, but I always am interested in women leaders. And Serena Wegman and Emma Hayes, they're 2 of the most influential figures in women's football coaching today. They both are known for their exceptional leadership qualities, and they both are very successful. Serena is a Dutch football manager, and Emma is a renowned English football manager.
Yeah, so we should point out you're talking about association football or soccer, not American football.
Yes, right? I am. Yes. Yeah. And when you look at what makes them such good leaders, it's that emotional intelligence. It's that empathy. Both of the coaches are known for prioritizing their players' perspectives and creating environments of mutual trust and respect. They also both are known for their communication, clear and honest communication. They make sure everybody knows what the expectations are and that people feel valued, that they can meet those expectations. They have the adaptability to adapt their strategies to meet the needs of their teams. That is a great example of emotional intelligence.
It is. And the other thing is, I'm getting off a tangent here, but this is what I do. I ran into this English guy at a party about 5 years ago, and I'm talking to him, and I'm kind of a fan of the Premier League, the Premier Soccer League in England, in Britain. And I know we started talking about football or soccer, or whatever you want to call it. And he brought up a really interesting thing to me. I never thought about this. He said, and if you stop and think about this, that soccer is the how did he put it? It's the once the game starts, the coach has no influence at all. It's all in the preparation. It's like American football. You're calling plays. You're taking players in and out. There's just like a chess aspect to it. In soccer, once the game starts, matter of fact, in the Premier League, literally the coach it's illegal for the coach to yell out plays. So once the game starts, it's like it's hands off. And I don't know why I brought that up, but it just, and the other thing is, I'm a big fan of women's volleyball, and I would make an argument, and forgive me, you might think this is sexist, but women's volleyball to me is the only sport where it's actually more interesting to watch women play than men, which is the reason they dominate that sport. I mean, they really do, even though there is men's volleyball, but everyone wants to watch the women. I've never been able to figure out why. But it's kind of the same thing with volleyball. So you can't really, there's no real, once the game starts, there's nothing really for the coach to do. I don't know why I brought that up. I just find it interesting. I don't know.
Well, I find everything that has to do, because I'm a big supporter of women leaders. I'm a big supporter of women in sports. For a long time, they haven't, people haven't recognized them the way that you did. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I keep telling my wife, if I was 20 years younger, I'd start the professional women's volleyball league. I would do it. I think because there seems to be, we go to the University of Minnesota here. They sell out every match. It's like, I'm just talking. But that's what I do, Lee. So it's like maybe it's not a bad thing. At any rate, so what can people do to increase their own brain capital?
Well, everybody needs to do that. Nobody can do it for you. And I think that you have to think about, number one, we've talked a lot about resilience, how you strengthen your resilience. And that comes a lot from paying attention to how do you become more cognitively flexible? Because some people, it's my way or the highway, and that does not doesn't build resilience. It doesn't build adaptability. It doesn't build much of anything. And
you're right about that, but there's two different aspects of that. On the one hand, one people they're like aggressively set in their ways, my way and the highway. Other people have a hard time with resilience just because of fear. They just they can't wrap their. So what's the difference between those two people? What's the difference between that?
Well, I'll tell you what they have in common, and that is neuroplasticity. Their neuroplasticity is what gives the brain the ability to change, to take that gray matter and make it flexible. If that brain doesn't have enough neuroplasticity, it gets stuck. And for those that cannot make that decision and move forward, their brain is stuck. And you can by learning new things, by doing novel things, following new ideas, you build that neuroplasticity. And I find that people that are so 100% obsessed with their idea, they have researched it so well, they've probably lived it, they probably can give you, countless stories and examples of how it's worked. Their brain has got the neuroplasticity going on. And I think another thing is how you adapt to stress. Because people with high brain capital, they don't just handle stress. They use it. They recognize they're in a stressful situation. They stop, they assess, and they recognize and decide, okay, this is something that I can grow from, and I'm going to improve my decision-making from this situation. And I tell everybody I coach, you make a mistake. Big deal. If you learn something from it, and if you apply what you learned, that's a win-win.
At 69 years old, I've come to the conclusion that the hardest thing for people to learn or let go is the fact that it's not bad to make bad decisions. It's like, I don't know about you. As a child, I think a lot of children think this, oh my God, I failed or I did something wrong. It's terrible. No, it's not terrible. It isn't,
It's not. It's learning experiences.
Right.
It's how you learn and it's how you grow.
You brought up something here about the fact that a lot of leadership changes are based on internal family disagreements, but is that necessarily a bad thing?
I don't think it has to be if it grows the business, if it leads, if it leads to growth. I mean, I've worked with some very small business owners and it's family owned.
Yeah.
And there's always family drama, but it's not just in the small companies. If you look at Estee Lauder, the cosmetics, huge, it's a global leader in beauty and cosmetics. And they've had a little family drama in the last 6 months. They, and I don't know if you're familiar with the company, but they're family owned, started by Estee Lauder and her husband. And all the family was so committed that it was a strength. It was a source of strength, but it was also made it pretty dynamic and complex internally. And when Jane, the granddaughter, last September wrote a letter to select board members saying that her cousin William's leadership wasn't up to par and he needed to be removed, that created some strong family trauma. And then in October, Jane resigned and William resigned. How'd they get through that? How did they save face? How did they not lose their reputation? And that was because of a person on their team, Meredith Webster. She was the executive VP of global communications and public affairs. And she guided the company through the transition for leadership. And she did that by being empathetic, by communicating very transparently. she used her emotional intelligence, and she was adaptable. So when you look at, whether it's a small family or a large family, it can be hard, and that emotional intelligence becomes even more important than it does when it's a third party.
Well, there's another thing too, and that is I'm sitting here talking about the fact that people succeed because they're obsessed. But here you have an example. What was that woman's name? Wilson Meredith. What was her name?
Meredith Webster.
Webster.
Mhm.
You have an idea where you have basically an outsider who's come in, and the one thing about being an outsider is that you have a kind of a dispassionate and casual overview of what's going on that people who are actually in it necessarily kind of sometimes lose. So I guess in some ways I'm contradicting myself, but I mean that's her strength there, right?
Absolutely. And she had the big picture in her mind. What's important? Our corporate reputation. And that's where she operated from.
Yeah. Now, out of this series, you've come on the show, and one of my things that we talk about regularly is loneliness and
Yep.
talking about internal family disagreements. This is my beef on this. People, every family has disagreements, like you say, but for most people, not all of them. I know some of them are really severe, but for most people, it's just petty. It's petty stuff. Like, how do you let go of that?
And that's the hard part, is letting go of it. We may be able to admit that it's petty, but because that lives in your subconscious, and it's there, and it just goes round and round and round, and it'll work its way up to that conscious level, and we'll just slap that right back down. I can't deal with that right now.
And then the next thing you know, you're not talking to your relatives.
Yeah. And then after 20 years, you realize, I've missed a lot. I've missed a lot of what's going on in my family. I haven't participated. I didn't go to the last wedding. Wasn't there for my grandpa before he died. And you recognize that was a big mistake.
And people make these mistakes every day. So how do we stop? How can we talk people into not making these mistakes?
And I've worked with clients that grandpa missing being with their grandfather before they died as recently. And it came down to that there was something that had happened in the family, but forgiveness was involved. Something had happened, and the person needed to forgive themselves. Not blaming everybody else and forgive others, but forgive themselves. And sometimes, I'll forgive a lot of people before I'll forgive myself. So I think that comes into play, and that comes into play into being able to accept yourself and recognize we all have strengths and we all have weaknesses.
Leigh, is that tied to the same thing about accepting failure or accepting the fact you're wrong? Is that the same thing?
I think there's an overlap there, because if you can't accept the fact that you're wrong, and it depends on your perspective, you don't have to always be right. Sometimes you take one for the team.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right, let's summarize all this. What are we talking about today? This brain capital thing.
Well, I think that brain capital, everybody can develop it, and those that do, it's a hidden asset. But it's what puts you at the top. You're at the top of your game. And brain capital depends upon your cognitive intelligence and your emotional intelligence, but it's more than that. It's about the resilience, the adaptability, and the agility. And organizations, we talked about Estee Lauder, they invested very highly in emotional intelligence. But that took them out of that transition stage. Organizations that invest in brain capital will see better outcomes in crisis leadership. So I think our big takeaway is that leaders can strengthen their brain capital, focus on your cognitive abilities, mindfulness, that helps you connect with your emotions, exercise, and self-care. Take care of yourself.
Yeah. I don't want to drag this out, but you brought up something in our previous talk, and then I can't remember where I was. I was watching television, and people were talking about the same thing, about the fact that there's not enough quiet time in most people's lives. And if you don't have any quiet time, you can't think. And you were talking about that same thing.
If you don't if you're not able to hit the pause button, then you're just going to be in cognitive overload the whole time.
Right. So really quickly, how do people do that? If someone's watching this and they're having a hard time putting their cell phone down, what do you tell them?
I tell them to stop and just focus on their breathing, because number one, you have to breathe. And if you can focus on changing your breath rate, when I'm talking to you, I'm breathing 12 to 14 breaths a minute. I have to spit it all out. But if I stop and I focus on my breathing and I slow it down, that changes my heart rate. And if I can get my breath rate and my heart rate to dance together, I've created heart rate variability. And that's a feeling of well-being. So if you can just stop, and you can do it anywhere. Doesn't matter if you're in the middle of a board meeting, you can stop and focus on your breathing.
That's fantastic advice. I mean, there you go. Folks, you just heard it. You heard it from a beautiful horse's mouth. I don't know if I meant that as a compliment. I hope it came off that way.
It did.
Leigh, can you give us, do you know what we're going to talk about next week then for our last show here?
For our last show, Jim, it'd be interesting to combine any comments or questions that you get, and maybe we keep everybody's interest up. And what is that next show? It's going to be about the brain, and it's going to be about brain capital. So let's build some interest, and let's see if that maybe makes sense.
Before we're done here, I just want to point out, if you can, if you have a question for Leigh, you could either text it to 408-458-5088, or you can call our call-in line when we're not on the air and leave a voicemail message. You got 2 minutes. That's 325-225-5546. That's on the bottom of the screen when we do all these shows. If you have a question for Leigh, you can text it or call it in, and we'll either play them or read them, one or the other. So, okay. Thank you, Leigh.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks. We'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye. Hi, all. I want to talk to you about Conk News. You've probably heard me talk about this before, but if you're a news junkie, you should try this out. Conk News is a news aggregator. Now, there are plenty of news aggregators on the web, but Conk News is different than all the rest, and here's how. Most other news aggregators will lump the top stories from each news source under that news source. The top 10 stories, like, for example, from Fox News, Breitbart, the New York Post, etc. What Conk News does is it sends its servers out onto the web to over 75 different news sources every 3 hours. And yes, this is an automated process, but in this case, that's actually a good thing. And collects the latest stories from said 75 sources and then lays them out on its own front page in the order they were posted, regardless of the source. So you see the latest stories at the top of the front page, regardless of where they're from. And this is all free to you. You don't need to log in. You don't need to subscribe, register, nothing. It's completely free. All you have to do is go to conk.com to check it out. That's conk.com, 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 Conk News. It would help if I turned the mic on, wouldn't it? Our thanks to Leigh Richardson. That's her second appearance in 2 weeks. She's coming on next Thursday, too. As I said, we haven't decided this yet, but we might do next Thursday live so we can take your questions. If you have a question for Leigh or me, or just want to call in and tell us about your sandwich while you're in your car, you can call the call-in line, by the way, which is now open. We're taking calls now at 325-225-5546. That's call Jim. If you need to remember that while you're in your car eating said sandwich. If you call in your car when we're not broadcasting live, you can leave a 2-minute message. You can also text me at 408-458-5088. At some point, we're working on bringing the chat into here, so that if you want to chat while we're talking, I can maybe recognize that. I'm old school and I'm just getting around to this stuff. I know it's been 18 months, I know, but what can I say? I'm an old fart, So, at any rate, thanks to Leigh. So, part 2 of our show, I got a lot of stuff today. Like, it's not a news show, but we kind of do the news. So, this is my first thought here. I texted this to myself, so I had a record of it. Why is everybody objecting so much to the government saving money? Have you ever thought about this? You'd think this would be a no-brainer. They're bombing Tesla dealerships all over the country. I mean, it's like they really want to put Elon Musk out of business. Now, I've heard so much erroneous information about this, that stuff that isn't simply true. First of all, yes, Elon Musk is the head of the Department of Government Efficiency. He's the head of that. It was a former executive agency that they renamed. I think it was the Office of Digital Management or something like that, and they renamed it and put him in charge. And I think he's getting paid $1 a year. He has no power. So all this stuff that people are saying, that all the stuff that Elon Musk is actually doing, he's not actually doing anything. All he does is collect information and relay it to the president. He makes recommendations. He does do that too. But he can't do anything and doesn't do anything. The president decides everything. Now, granted, usually it appears the president takes up whatever recommendation he makes, but that's the president's purview and his that's his right. He can do that. Elon Musk doesn't do anything other than collect the information. And the information he collects is that we've been wasting gobs of money. And the thing is, you knew that we were wasting money. I knew we were wasting money, but that much money? Oh my God. I mean, they throw around $100 billion like it's nothing. And I want to tell you, $100 million is a shitload of money. And let alone 1,000 times that. And you understand that's how that works. $1 billion is 1,000 million. That's what $1 billion is. $1 trillion is 1,000 billion dollars. So yeah, it's and now I don't know I haven't checked the stock price today. I don't know. I know that the Tesla stock's going down, partly because he hasn't been paying much attention to his business, and partly because people are starting to panic because all these cars and Tesla dealerships are getting bombed. But he is or was the richest person in the world, or certainly in the top 5, if he's not right now. And he's worth about $400 billion is the last I heard. Maybe 225, 250 now. I don't know. It goes up and down a lot. But $1 billion is a lot of money. Like I said, $100 million is 1/10 of $1 billion. And that's a lot of money. And we were talking with Think last night. We were discussing this. My friend in finance, we kind of throw this around for fun. And my friend in finance is fairly wealthy. But I don't think he has quite this much money. But, basically, if you can clear $10 million post-tax, or maybe $20 million pre-tax, because, about half of it's going to go to taxes. If you were to make $20 million, like in one fell swoop, whatever you're doing, the stock market, invention, something, excuse me. I got my fabulous Diet Coke. It's a wonder to behold. If you have that sort of money, you could live off $10 million comfortably for the rest of your life, because you're going to get about 5% return on that. Maybe last few years a little more, about 7%, and then about 20% of that is going to go to capital gains tax. So you're going to end up with about $400,000 or $500,000 a year. And so, okay, you might not be able to buy a yacht from that, but you're going to live pretty well, And so, as you don't touch the principal, you basically have your personal endowment. That's how much money it takes to live effortlessly in the United States. basically 10 million bucks. And so you think about that, 100 million bucks, which is 10 times that. So then you would have your yacht. That's 1/10 of $1 billion. Okay. You figure out we got our math straight here. So the government has been throwing money around like it's just you can't go out of style. There's also, let me tell you about fraud. So it turns out that FEMA was taking applications from the people whose houses burned down in Pacific Palisades in Los Angeles, right? It's about 13,000 houses that were destroyed. They got applications from 270,000 people. In other words, 20 times more applications than the houses that existed. It's all fraud. All of it. And there's a lot of people who said they applied to FEMA and then found out they were actually locked out because someone else had already applied it for their name and address. It's unbelievable. Americans, we're just freaking shysters. It's like it's like that's how many people committed fraud. In other words, so about 20 times the more, 19, I don't know. All right, let's another way to break this down. The number of legitimate homeowners who have a claim to that money is only 5% of the number of people that applied. 95% of them are lying hoaxers and assholes. 95%. Unbelievable. Now, did you hear that anyplace else? No, you didn't. You didn't hear that anywhere else, did you? No. Even Bill O'Reilly's not going to tell you that. And Bill thinks he tells you everything. I don't know about Bill. I watch that show sometimes, his No Spin News. He's a fantastic political analyst. The guy really is. There's nobody better. But my God, the ego on him is unbelievable. I mean, he just drips egotism. And it's uncomfortable to watch sometimes. I can't watch it, And then again, I don't want to get started. I don't want to insult him because the thing is, yeah, he does some things extremely well. There's things he does like political analysis better than anybody on the planet. It's like I do truly admit that. So maybe he's due to his ego. Maybe he can justify his egotism. That's fine. Supposedly Johnny Carson was a very arrogant man, but he was the best talk show host on the planet too. I mean that's the thing. Can you blame a guy for being arrogant if you're that good? I mean, Will Chamberlain not only, had for years had the record number of points in the NBA and made love to 20,000 women. What am I going to say to Wilt? Yeah, okay. I'm just going to bow to him. That's what I'm going to do. And Carson too. So I don't know. Should I bow to O'Reilly? I have no idea. I really don't. But my God, sometimes he's just insufferable. But I don't know if he'll tell you that or not. But I just told you, 270,000 people applied for FEMA grants, and only 13,000 were able to get them, or was justified in getting them. And so now let's talk about Chuck Schumer. Now he's become the patsy of the left. And the thing is, and we were talking about this last night. Think and I were talking about the fact that from Schumer's point of view, from a strategic point of view, he absolutely did the right thing. And I'm not the only person saying that, Now, no, it's like, do I want the Democrats to fail? Well, here's the deal. I feel very strongly that we need two strong parties to yin and yang against each other because democracy is supposed to be a very messy business. That's the way it's set up. It's set up. And if you think, we are in chaos. No, chaos is the point. That's the idea. The system is set up not to generate chaos, but at least to work with it, So Schumer made a very calculated decision, which was, as far as I can tell, correct. And I'm not the only person who said this. And there's a lot of Democrats who have said it, not a lot. They're a minority now, apparently. And a lot of people, Republicans, who said that if you're trying to accomplish what he's trying to accomplish, he did the right thing, So, but no, they don't see it that way. They don't. Now, meanwhile, I'm jumping ahead here. I was going to talk about this later, but I never realized that I have a natural segue. It turns out that white college-age women in the United States are basically completely at odds with everybody else. That the surveys are done. They've talked about different issues. Do you like Donald Trump? Do you hate Donald Trump? Do you think Doge is a good idea or not? Did Schumer do the right thing? Steve Kornacki's on NBC News, and that's his shtick now, is going through this data, and he's kind of entertaining. He does it pretty well, But he has pointed out, and other people pointed out now, that this polling data has come in that white college educated women in the United States are basically at odds with everybody else. It's like, and you get your varying degrees, so you got your white college educated men, you got your white non-college educated men, and then you have your white non-college educated women, and of course you have black women and white black men, and it goes on and on and on. Now, people on various issues agree. Those groups agree or disagree in different amounts, but generally, everyone kind of either agrees or disagrees about everything, except college educated white women. They hate everything that's going on. Everything. They're the ones who think that Chuck Schumer just did a terrible dastardly thing by doing this. And then I talk about The View. I don't understand why anybody watches that. 2.5 million people watch every day. And now I realize, well, that's the reason, because all college educated women, white women that are watching, because that's who's on the panel. That's who's broadcasting there. So I look at that and I think, well, that's crazy. Those are crazy people. But there's a subset of America that totally buys into that. And they don't even need the prompting from The View. And there's been various theories of why this is happening among college-educated white women, what the deal is. But the fact is, no, they're the minority of the public that's basically running the leftist chain gang circus. And so that's you want to point a finger, you go ahead and point. I can't point because I will end up in the doghouse. So I'm not pointing, but I do need to point this out. And like I said, this is my opinion here. This is actually data that's come in, a polling data, but from various sources, all highly reputable. And I could make an argument that NBC is actually a left-wing news organization, but this is their conclusion too. Kornacki does a pretty good job. He does. I don't. I don't necessarily agree with their ideological viewpoint, but the fact is, whatever, they have one. And all news organizations does. It's only in the last few years that people are expecting unbiased news. Up until about maybe at least 2000, roughly, in the 20th century, most news, and I was going to say news organizations, but we really specifically have to say newspapers. Most newspapers had a broadcasted bias. They were either right leaning or left leaning. I mean, a perfect example are the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. No one even at the Times will discount the fact that they are a left leaning newspaper. The Wall Street Journal will tell you they're a conservative publication. They will tell you that, especially and we're talking about the opinion pages now, not necessarily the news itself. Which both of those organizations like to tell you that their news is relatively unbiased. And I could argue sometimes yes and sometimes no. But the fact of the matter is their newsroom has a certain bias, and this has been going on for 200 years. And you tell the public what your bias is, and that's not a bad thing. Now all of a sudden people are expecting the news to be completely unbiased, and it's never been that way. I mean, okay, you can point to Walter Cronkite. Now, what you probably don't know about Walter Cronkite, and for the youngins, do I have to do this? Okay, boomer. He was the anchorman of the CBS Evening News from roughly 1959 to 1982, I think. I mean, Uncle Walter is what he was called. He was considered the single most He regularly won polls as the most trustworthy person in America. Now, what you didn't know about Walter Cronkite is Walter Cronkite was a communist, and I'm not exaggerating here. He was a dyed-in-the-wool communist. He was about as radical left-wing person you get. You never knew that from listening to a broadcast on TV. Never. It never came out. He did a fantastic job keeping his own political feelings to himself. He did. He only did one editorial in the entire time he ran the CBS Evening News, and that is he did an editorial asking President Johnson to get out of the Vietnam War. And at that point, the thing about I'm listening to my mother bitch about the hippies. She's 100 years old. Okay, she could bitch about the hippies, and I was telling her she doesn't know what I'm talking about Eric Cartman in South Park bitching about the goddamn hippies. He's 10 years old and he's bitching about it. But the fact is, in retrospect, the student uprisings that happened in the 1960s about the war, the students were basically correct. The war was a sham. It's terrible because 55,000 people lost their lives, Americans fighting that war. And I have relatives who came back. I mean, these people they're goddamn heroes. There's just no way to put it. But they ended up fighting this war basically for nothing. Because as soon as we pulled out 2 weeks later, the North Vietnamese won. So it was basically for nothing. So in retrospect, you have to give the students their due. Now you contrast that with what's going on like at Columbia now. It could not be more different. These students now, they are such idiots. It's mind-boggling, and they're basically being played, and they don't seem to realize it at all. They're being completely played. But they don't know. I don't even have to wait for history here. It's going to come back years from now. They're going to look like such fools. And you know what's going to happen? Because it's the same thing that happened to the quote unquote goddamn hippies in the 1960s. Half of them will realize their mistake and go on and basically be apologetic and go on to other lives. And the other half will just stick with it. And that's exactly what happened in the 1960s. Matter of fact, they were totally, you got Abby Hoffman, and I can't remember the name of the guy. He went on to become a very famous Wall Street investor. I can't remember his name, but he was part of that group. And they went for years. They did a speaking debate tour where they were still fabulous friends, apparently. But they would go on and debate each other. Hoffman still, he was still there, power to the people, screw the man. And his friend had become the man. And that's what's going to happen again, too. About half these kids will get a clue about the fact that they were idiots and the other half won't. So, and I have no idea why. What's the difference between somebody who does and somebody who doesn't? I do not know. I mean, I remember reading this in USA Today. This is a good 20, 30 years ago now. But I still find this really fascinating that people who have gone through children who have gone through extreme trauma, like they've either been tortured or they've gone through a war situation or, intense sexual abuse. The amazing thing is, so these kids were followed by researchers into adulthood, and half of them basically recovered from their traumatic experiences, and the other half didn't. And the researchers could find no tie between the people in those two groups. They could not figure out why some people recovered and why some people did not. They said there was nothing, and they went through all the data. They couldn't find any pattern at all, none. Some of the kids recovered, and some of them never did, and they couldn't figure out what the difference was. They couldn't, and it's just we're humans. We're crazy. We're strange beings, All right. Speaking of strange beings, uh, let's talk about dwarves, okay? So the live action version of Snow White's coming out. It looks like this film is going to completely and totally bomb. And when all is said and done, it cost, with the promotion costs, it costs Disney about $350 million because they had to redo most of it. And part of the reason they had to redo most of it is because the original version of the seven dwarves were live action dwarves, but they weren't little people. They were regular, young men. And they all, instead of like being droopy and sleepy and all that sort of stuff, they all had some sort of DEI victimhood, a different one or something like that. It was cloyingly terrible. And so they ran it by a bunch of test audiences. The audience says, this sucks. So they went back and they reshot about half or three-quarters of the movie. So they replaced the real non-dwarf seven dwarfs with CGI generated Seven Dwarfs in a live action movie. In other words, it's a live action movie, but the Seven Dwarfs are cartoons. And so now you have the dwarf actor community, and I think that's the correct political term. I don't really know. I don't care. You know what I'm talking about. The dwarf actor community in Hollywood has really, really raised their ugly head here. They are really pissed off because Seven Dwarfs did not get jobs, and they should be because it's a live action movie with no live dwarfs. It's like what? And then they wonder why people don't want to see this. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So supposedly the reviews are coming back very mixed. The Gal Gadot and what's her name? Zegler, the woman who plays Snow White. Well, first of all, they're at odds with each other because Gadot is a hardcore Israeli. She's an Israeli person. So she's really, really against Hamas. And of course, Ziegler says, no, 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 no. The Israelis they're colonizers, all this sort of stuff. So they've been going on tour together, but they don't like speak or show up at the same time. So the whole thing's just a mess. It's just a mess. And also they hired this Ziegler girl, and I don't even think she's 30, and she's been a publicity nightmare. I mean, I don't know if she'll work again after this. Because a lot of the reason this movie gets such bad buzz is not the movie itself, but because of what she's been saying on the publicity tour. So she's basically a radical leftist, and she's been talking about, and she's been putting down the original film, the cartoon film. She's been poo-pooing that. And then you got this too. And so was it Emily Compagno on Gutfeld, I think, was saying, why do you need to redo this in the first place? The original film was virtually perfect in its own way, because I guess if you're Disney, you have to you have to do live action versions of every single classic cartoon you've ever done. And so $350 million later, it looks like this thing's going to go kaput. So you should know that. Okay, so moving on. You can call me 325-225-5546. Send me a text, 408-458-5088. And I never mention this, and I should start mentioning this stuff. If you're on Rumble or YouTube or wherever you're watching this, subscribe to our channel. Why don't you? You get on Rumble. I know they send out the notices kind of late, and I have never, I've been upfront about this. We have relatively few people that watch this live. So the vast majority of the viewing comes on demand, and that's fine because we got to do the show sooner or later anyway. And I'd rather do it live because then you can't actually call in, and people do. As a matter of fact, considering our viewership, it's amazing how many people do call in, because I was talking to Michael Harrison, our friend from Talkers Magazine. I mean, he's basically the grand poobah of talk media in the United States, and he laughs when I say that, but it's really true. It really is. But no, he has said, all sorts of radio stations, even in New York City, even the major markets, can't get people to call in anymore. I watched Jimmy Fallon's radio show on Fox Nation, and he takes call-ins over 3 hours. He hardly ever gets phone calls. They're constantly broadcasting the number. Now, we're not doing the same thing, and you could say we're constantly not getting phone calls either. It's that our viewership is only like, the single digits compared to his. So, the fact that we got people calling in at all, I consider that pretty cool. And I'm hoping we can get more too as things go on. So last night, we did open phones last night, and our friend Think called in, and I was just talking about this. So I want to get back to this about the JFK files that are released. Hold on. I need a little lubrication. I, however, do not need 4 shots of vodka before I go on, because that's what J.D. Vance said. That's what Kamala Harris needed before she gave a speech. Of course, she's being funny, but still, it's funny, especially her word salad. Okay, so they released, this is Tuesday, I think, 2 days ago. They released 80,000 pages of the files of the JFK assassination that had previously been classified. Now, I haven't seen any of them. Our friend over David Strong over at Hot Air, he has, and this is what's come out for the two. Apparently, everyone assumed, well, AI will scan all 80,000 pages and come up with a summary. but apparently some of the pages a lot of them are so badly photocopied that they can't run it through the scanner. So people literally have to sit down and read this manually. But what's come out now, I was talking about this last night, but it bears repeating. What's come out now is that it looks like the Soviet Union hired Lee Harvey Oswald to kill John F. Kennedy. They paid him. And what also came out, and I didn't get a chance to mention this last night, is that they hired Jack Ruby to kill Oswald. In other words, they did both of those things, you know? So my theory, I've given you my theory in the past, and I'll very briefly recap it here, that Oswald was involved, but he wasn't the only shooter. There's a guy named James Files who claims that he blew up Kennedy's head from the grassy knoll, and there's some physical evidence to corroborate his story, which is the reason I believe him. And also, it's well known that he was connected to the Chicago mob, and what happened, according to him and other people who are involved in this, is that the CIA wanted to off Kennedy because they were pissed off about the Bay of Pigs, which Kennedy does. I won't say, I don't know if you could say he screwed it up, but he definitely screwed the CIA in that whole operation. He did, because he pledged that he was going to send in an aerial backup, and he didn't. And hundreds of CIA agents either got slaughtered or got sent off to Cuban prison camps and got mercilessly tortured. And the CIA basically never forgave him for that. And supposedly that was their justification for wanting him dead. Supposedly. So Files said his boss, Chuck Nicoletti. Oh, no, I got to back up here. So the reason this happened, the CIA wanted to kill Kennedy, but they don't do anything. First of all, at that time, when I think still this is true, but nobody seems to care anymore. Legally, they couldn't operate in the United States. The way this worked at that time, anyway, and I think technically or theoretically still does, the FBI is the internal U.S. Department law enforcement, and the CIA was the external or foreign law enforcement of the arm of the United States. So they couldn't actually do anything in the country. So what they would do, and this is not the first time they did it, apparently, they would hire the mafia to do the killings for them. Not just JFK, but anybody they needed assassinated inside the U.S., because technically they couldn't do it. So they decided we'll be kosher, and the mob was really good at it. And the Chicago mob was particularly good at it. And the guy running the assassination bureau there was named Chuck Nicoletti, and James Files was one of his underlings. And Files was apparently the guy using the Remington Fireball prototype pistol shot JFK in the head from the grassy knoll, supposedly. But according to Files, his boss, Chuck Nicoletti, was in the Dell Tech building, which is kitty corner across the street from the Texas School Book Depository. And somebody else, although Files never knew exactly who it was, he said we had a shooter in the sixth floor of the Texas School Book Depository. Now, it's obvious, well, that was Oswald. But the thing is here, and this is where my friend's going to come up crazy, but this does bear repeating. Oswald was definitely in the building. Oswald was definitely involved in this operation. There's no doubt about it. But there's no real proof that he was sitting in the window and pulled the trigger. There isn't. Because here's the deal. At 5 p.m. that night, Friday, November 22nd, the U.S. government did a press conference, and it was Pierre Salinger was the press secretary of Kennedy, and I can't remember, it was his assistant, whose name I can't remember. His assistant did the press conference, and they said that on the sixth floor of the Texas School Book Depository, they found a rifle, and the rifle was German. That's what he said. And it's been well known since this whole thing happened that Oswald used a cheap Italian rifle to shoot Kennedy. That's always been the case. And supposedly, and this is the thing, 4 days later, they found that rifle in the sniper's nest in the sixth floor of the School Book Depository. 4 days later, even though the place had been searched numerous times. But that night, they said they had a German rifle, and I think they said it was a Messerschmitt. I'm not sure. I can't remember. But the thing is, and this is all verified documented history. I mean, you can go back and watch the press conference. I've seen it. I've seen it numerous times. They filmed it. It's on film. And so that wasn't what Oswald was shooting. It wasn't, or supposedly used. There's no real evidence that Oswald actually pulled the trigger, but he was definitely there. And also, he almost certainly brought the rifles into the building. So okay, now I have to go back here. There's a little evidence that he didn't pull the trigger, because 1 minute after the assassination, 1 minute after the shots rang out, numerous people, including the manager of the building and a police officer, saw Oswald sitting in the second floor commissary of the Texas School Book Company, casually sitting there at a table drinking a Coke. They saw that. That he was seen by numerous people, and like I said, even a police officer. And a police officer actually went on affidavit and actually said, yeah, he was there. And the police officer actually asked he was touring the building with the manager, who is this guy? And the manager said, oh, he works here. Don't worry about it. And he did. Oswald worked at the Texas. He had been working at the Texas School Book Depository for a month. So you think the problem is, CBS News did this years later. I think about 10 years later. They timed how long it would take to get from the sixth floor sniper's nest to the second floor break room. You could do it in a minute, but you'd have to run at breakneck speed. And this is a tiny little detail, but it's worth noting. It would take about 30 seconds to get a Coke out of that machine. So therefore, you have a minute and a half of running like hell, and supposedly they saw Oswald sitting there very calmly, not disheveled at all, drinking this Coke within less time of that. So there's that. And the policeman and the manager weren't the only people to see him there. They weren't. And you think about this. If you want an alibi in your Oswald, that's exactly what you would do. If you knew somebody else was on the sixth floor pulling the trigger and you were involved, you'd be on the second floor where people could see you. There's that too. So my point is, and it's maybe a minor point, Oswald was definitely involved. There's no doubt about that. But I don't know if he actually pulled the trigger in the sixth floor. So according to Files, you had 3 shooters, which is normally how you do this. You triangulate it. And Files boss Nicoletti said to only shoot if it's obvious he's not dead yet. So Files says he waited to the last possible moment and pulled the trigger and blew up Kennedy's head. The Remington Fireball is still a pistol that's in production now. It's essentially a very short rifle. You use it as a pistol, but it's essentially a rifle. And it was a prototype in 1963. He said the mob actually got one from Remington to test out. And Files, who was a professional assassin, he apparently killed a lot more people before he killed Kennedy. He loved it. So there's 2 pieces of evidence here that Files did this. First of all, he said he ordered special mercury rounds from the armament of the mafia in Chicago, because he liked the idea, because mercury killed people really quick. If you didn't kill them by the shot itself, mercury in the bloodstream would definitely kill you. It was like a double whammy. So there's that. And in JFK's autopsy, they found mercury in his bloodstream. They didn't know how it got there, because mercury in your blood is a toxin. It's poisonous. And they found it. Secondly, Files had a very, very weird compunction about the fact that he would leave anytime he did a killing. He would take the cartridge that came out of his rifle or his shotgun or his pistol, and he would bite down on the casing and leave it there. And apparently he told Nicoletti he did that. Nicoletti got really pissed off at him, because what are you doing leaving evidence? It's nuts. All right, that was November 22nd, 1973. In 1982, 19 years later, a guy from Houston and his son says, let's go take some metal detectors over to Dealey Plaza. Now, metal detectors didn't exist in 1963, or even I think they didn't come into invention until the 70s. I think it was a good 10 years after that. So we're talking about 19 years later. And so this guy and his son, he's a dentist. Which was actually fortuitous here because they kind of plays into this. He's scanning behind the fence on the grassy knoll, which was the same fence that was there, and as far as I know, it's the same fence that's still there 60 years later, a wooden fence, and he finds this cartridge, and the cartridge has teeth marks on it. And this is after Files told people that he bit down on the cartridge. So, and they sent this guy was apparently already a dentist, but still they sent the thing off to be corroborated. And no, these marks are made by a human biting on this, you know. So there's two things there that Files said that corroborate his story, and no one else has any corroboration or any other story, and Files' story actually kind of more or less includes Oswald in the whole thing. So anyway, so the what Strom says is that the files seem to indicate right now that the Soviet Union paid Oswald to kill Kennedy. Now this makes a lot of sense because Oswald moved to the Soviet Union in 1961 and he married a woman there and he renounced his US citizenship. Then in very early 1963, he wants to come back to the United States. Now, normally in a normal circumstances, you want to get back into the United States, especially after you renounced your citizenship and came from the Soviet Union, a communist country. And not only did they let Oswald back in, but he basically got in with no problems. He didn't have to do anything. He didn't have to go through a debriefing. He didn't have to spend any time in jail. Nothing. He just got back into the country. And that was extremely unusual under those circumstances. What we know now is that Oswald was an operative for the CIA, and it appears that he might have been a double agent, and the CIA didn't know it. So this gets very complicated. And then you're thinking, well, why did they keep the secret for so long? Because the CIA is embarrassed. Apparently, according to what Strom has found out in these papers, the CIA knew that the Russians had hired Oswald to kill Kennedy, and they followed him around for months, and they still didn't stop it. And so, and Strom even says this himself. Did they not stop it because they didn't want to stop it? Is that the reason? But in this whole story, this is so murky. This will never be definitively solved ever. And people can go through these files, all that sort of stuff. But at least there's some evolving story here, at least. So anyway, I find this completely fascinating, of course, and it's like because I was 8 years old and I still remember coming home from school and turning on the TV to see my little kiddie lunch show, and this was on television. I still remember. Yeah. All right. So what do you want to know now? I'll tell you what you want to know. The number of people on Earth. The number of people on Earth right now is estimated to be about 8.2 billion people. Got that? Okay. So the study comes out. Of course, they're all studies, and somebody's studying stuff. This is really fascinating, though. They're starting to think that estimate, and of course, it's only an estimate, and it's been done by census figures and population densities, which now we can confirm from space through pictures from satellites. So that's how we get the estimate of 8.2 billion people. These researchers have come to the conclusion that might be way low, and this is their reasoning is really fascinating. What they decided to do is they decided over the last 10 or so years to go to all the places on the planet where people have put in dams, because dams create lakes. If you dam up a river, you end up with a lake behind it. And in most of those instances, the people who are living on that land that's going to become the lake have to be resettled, right? And because in most instances, the company that builds or is hired to build that dam has to pay those people per person an individual amount of money to move, that count is very important. It's usually very, very precise. So they went through, I think it was 10 years of data and came up with 163 instances of people of dams being built and people having to be moved. And since those counts are extremely precise, they came to the conclusion that worldwide, on the earth, worldwide, the number of people living in rural areas has been greatly underestimated. And they might have a point. I mean, here's a statistic I was just talking about this for a friend of mine over lunch last weekend about the fact that supposedly only 4% of the American continental U.S. is actually occupied by humans. That's not very much. And this is including, Los Angeles County, which is the largest county in the United States, both by area and population. 10 million people are there. Manhattan Island, which is 1.2 million people living on the island. The island is 21 miles long and 10 miles wide at its widest point. 1.2 million people. It's the most densely populated area of the United States. And not only that, 10 million people work on that island every day. Only 1.2 million live there. But 10 million people are on Manhattan Island every weekday. So you take all that into account, and you end up with only 4% of the landmass being occupied, and that's because you go to the Rockies, and you'll find less than one person per square mile. That's why. But there's a possibility that number is low. So I find this really interesting. I mean, they're talking about it might be off by billions. So this is interesting. In other words, we don't have 8.2 billion brothers and sisters. We might have 10.2. That's a lot. So it's the math I did earlier. A billion is it's a lot of people. That's a billion people is a lot of people. So, and then let's go to Argentina, where now I don't know if you guys know this, and if you've deduced this from me talking about this. Argentina and Chile, which are right next to each other, are like some of the biggest UFO hotspots on the planet. They've been seeing stuff there, and they're talking about, there's people who've said they've seen UFOs land in the middle of little towns, and gray aliens get out. I mean, I'm serious. They supposedly have seen this. Now you're thinking, well, why are they going to Argentina? Because it doesn't make the press in either Britain or the United States or Europe. That's why. It's plainly obvious that up till now, anyway, the ETs do not want to be seen. They don't. And I'm going to get to that in just a minute. I have something I want to show you. I make sure to put a picture on there for screen. God almighty, like production values. Who would have known it? But yeah, Argentina and Chile are one of the two craziest UFO places on Earth. So one thing, there's this town in Argentina. It's called Saladillo. No, actually, that is the exact story here. But it's okay. There's this town where they have what's called ghost lights. They have these orbs following people around, and apparently this has been going on for years and years. Now, I've told you, and if you listen to our interview with Steve Mayer on last Tuesday, we talked about this. There's a guy named Patrick Jackson in the UK who wrote a book called Quantum Paranormal. Now, if you want to read something, and this is a little dense because this book is a little scientifically based, and that's actually the reason it's so cool. Jackson is an IT guy by profession. He studies data. That's what he studied. Now, I can't remember. Forgive me. I read the whole book. It's really fascinating. But he somehow figured out that there's a data aspect to these spheres that people have been seeing, and they've seen them all over the earth. He said something's going on here. So he tied two things together. And Mira and I talked about this, about the fact that maybe hauntings have something to do with UFOs, because like Mira mentioned in the interview, there's a lot of similar stuff that happens in both instances. You got haunted houses, and then you got people or places that seem to have the UFO hotspots, and a lot of the crap that happens is the same. So Patrick Jackson went to one of the single most haunted places in the UK. Is a place called 30 East Drive, and I can't remember what county, what shire it's in, what county it's in. But anyway, if you know anything about paranormal stuff in Britain, this is like the place apparently. And now the owners of this property moved out because they couldn't stand living there, and they rent the place out to people who basically want to experience it. And apparently, they're doing a booming business. They have no trouble between paranormal investigators and just people that want to be scared by weird shit in the night. They have no trouble renting the place out for the weekend. They don't. So Jackson got a couple buddies of his, science bud nerds, and they rented the house out for a week, and they stayed there. And what he noticed, first of all, they experienced a multitude of paranormal stuff, and specifically what's called shadow people. And so, if you know about it, if you watch the Unsolved Mysteries of the Paranormal on a camera on TV or whatever the hell you're watching, the shadow people are ghosts that appear as black voids, basically in the environment. And they sometimes you can see them walk around and stuff. They're basically like black ghosts, but it's like a hole. It's like a hole in reality there, where they're standing and where they move. Okay, but Patrick Jackson noticed something that nobody really seemed to have noticed anymore. He said, "We saw these things," and he caught them on tape too, but they seem kind of digitized. He said, "What I noticed is what looked like digital signature or digital just deformation of these images." And he said, not on the tape. He said, actually looking at them in real time. He said, I'm staring at this thing and I can see fuzzy digital digitation on the edges. And he's saying, well, that's weird because most ghosts you'd think don't know anything about digitizing their persona. You'd think that. So he did a bunch of, they went through the data, and this is his theory. I'm going to get down to his theory because, I don't want to talk about the whole 270 pages of the book. His theory is that all these little orbs that people see, they see all over the planet, these little metallic spheres that are basically within 1 to 2 feet in diameter. Most of them about the size of a basketball, either a little bigger or a little smaller. He says what they are is they're probes, and they're all networked together, and they're being run by an extraterrestrial entity. Now, I don't know how he figured this out. I can't remember because he said this in the book almost in passing. He says he's concluded that the entities that are running them now inherited this network system and had been abandoned by someone else. But they picked it up, because he said a lot of it's like software that hasn't been repaired or corrected. He said a lot of it runs not only inefficiently but mistakenly, and I'll get to that in a minute too. It's really interesting. So he's come to the conclusion that what's happening here is these little orbs. And the thing is, the orbs. If you do anything reading about haunted houses at all, the people see these little orbs all over the place inside these homes. He says what happens is that these little orbs or these spheres, they basically park themselves inside structures because the people who run them, the extraterrestrials that are running them, know they're highly radioactive and dangerous to humans. And he said they are programmed to create all this shitty paranormal ghost-like stuff to keep people away from them, to literally scare people away from them, because they know if people get close to them, they could be seriously harmed. So that's his thing, is that they reside in these buildings, and they leave to do their drone activity, which is basically monitoring and collecting data on the planet. And then they come back and park themselves. And so they park in these houses because the houses, they're either not occupied, or when and if they are, then they start creating all this weird noises and stuff and digitizing shadow people, which are basically projections. According to Jackson, they're projections from the drones to scare people away so that they will not get hurt, because apparently the ETs don't want to hurt anybody. They just want their damn data. It's a really, really fascinating concept. It really is. So you're talking about these in Argentina, they're seeing these orbs not only all over the place, but people there's little towns where they've been seeing them for years and years. They've almost become common occurrences now. Now, the other thing that happened in Argentina uh, is there there have been increasing sightings, including by police, of this uh, humanoid creature that's walking around on all fours, and apparently it can walk. It can walk or run on all fours very fast. So, and we're talking about 2 arms and 2 feet, and crawling around on the ground. Now, there's a video of this online. Coast to Coast AM posted it. Uh, I think is very, very unconvincing. To me, it looks like it's fake. But the thing is, there are policemen who have gone on the record saying they've seen this thing. So, and that town is called Saladillo, Argentina. In that town, and apparently many people have seen this humanoid figure running or walking around, and a lot of times it walks on all fours. Not always. Apparently, sometimes it stands up. I don't. Yeah, seriously, it was one of those. Like I said, and like Mira was talking about. You may. I'm here telling you about paranormal stuff. I'm basically a skeptic. I look at this video, I'm thinking that's fake, and it does. It looks fake to me. I've seen a lot of video. Most of it's bad. And Mira and I talked about this about the Santilli film of the alien autopsy that Fox News ran on television. This is going back to 1996. I saw that too. My first thought is, oh, that's fake. That's fake. And the really interesting thing is, Mira concluded the same thing I did, and he's there and he knows more about it. And that is, first thing I watched this thing. I don't know if you've seen it. It's been on television a million times. It's a 20-minute film of a bunch of doctors. It's in black and white, basically dissecting, doing an autopsy on what's supposedly a gray alien. That's what it is. And I'm watching this. I'm like, this is so fake. And then the next thing that occurs to me, after I stopped thinking about it for a while, and a while will be months, I started to realize, well, it may be fake, but my God, that must have cost somebody a shitload of money, you know? And so then people are starting to dissect it and realize that every single thing that appears on camera is common to that era. It was supposedly filmed in 1947. And every single thing checked out. Every single thing. The scalpels. I mean, somebody went through all of this. There's even things that they thought didn't check out. It turns out they did. One was a clock on the wall. Somebody said, no, that's a modern clock. Turns out it wasn't. It was actually from that clock was manufactured in 1947 too. So I see this all the time. It's like, and so Mira and I were talking about this, and he said he came to the same conclusion. I concluded that it would have cost at least $500,000 to film that in 1996 money, which would probably be about $1.5 million now, probably. And the thing is, you're talking about doing it on spec. So, but Mira did conclude, as I did too, there's a possibility somebody did that just for the money because they knew the payoff would be huge, So, but I started to wonder whether the film is real for that reason. It would cost way too much money to fake it, So the thing is, there's this film of the humanoid in Argentina. I'm going to post it on our blog so you can see it. I thought about running it, but the thing is, it has Argentinian sound and all people are talking. It's just weird. And I think it's just fake. I think it's fake. I do. So I've been wrong before. I was wrong once in 1972. Now I want to show you something else here too. I want to show you this. So I don't know if you've seen this picture before, or this is from a film. This is called the jellyfish UFO or the jellyfish UAP. There's this base in Iraq, a U.S. Army base in Iraq, that's been basically haunted or spooked by this thing that's been flying around there apparently for a couple years. But the reason I'm showing it to you is because I just learned this the other night about the fact that, matter of fact, I can't remember. Mira told me this. Everything blends together, folks. I can't remember. That the really, really weird thing about this is like this thing's been flying around there, this location on an almost daily basis, but it's on film. And the reason it's on film is because they're using FLIR, infrared, and thermal cameras. You can see it clearly on a camera. You can't see it with your real eyes, with your own eyes. If the camera's running in real time and you look to where the camera's pointing, you can't see this, but the camera can see it. And excuse me, that's been the case the entire time. That's really, really weird. You can't see, no one's ever seen it with their own eyes. The only reason they know it's there is because there's cameras all over the base and the cameras run in real time and people are constantly tracking it with these cameras. That's how they know. Infrared and thermal cameras are slightly different. Thermal cameras run off heat. Infrared cameras run off the infrared spectrum of light, which is invisible to the human eye. That's how, and so apparently it shows up on both, but it will not show up if you just try looking at it. You won't see it. And that's the reason I put this up on the screen tonight. I just find that just amazing. It's very hard to argue with the fact that, like somebody said, and the people who work at this base have been talking about this for years, that either this is some really, really high-tech thing that we have, or it's extraterrestrial in nature, one or the other. And the thing is, if it's high tech, why is it flying around? If it's ours, why is it flying around on one of our army bases? And also for 2 years straight. I mean, supposedly at this particular base, the army's never released where it exactly is, but this is almost a daily occurrence. They see this thing constantly through the cameras anyway. You can't see with your eyes. And that brings me to our last thing here. I'm going to post a link to this on Popular Mechanics too, and I don't think this is within the paywall. I subscribe to a lot of publications to do the show. I do. It's like, and the things, you're supporting good journalism, and not only that, you get to read stuff you can't read otherwise. So there's that too. There's both, and I subscribe to Popular Mechanics. I find this really kind of interesting. I'm going to offer an opinion here. When I was growing up, Popular Mechanics and Popular Science were run by the same company, and they were slightly different. This Popular Science was more of a scientific theoretical thing, and Popular Mechanics was more of a hands-on thing. They've split up now, and my personal conclusion is Popular Mechanics is but the much better publication. It is. Popular Science is not that good. And not only that, Popular Mechanics actually deals with more scientific and theoretical stuff than it used to years ago. But there's an article in Popular Mechanics from the last few days about the fact that about reverse engineering alien technology, which Grush said in his testimony to Congress, he said that we're doing. And there's a lot of other people who have been talking about this, the fact that we're at least attempting it. This new movie that came out that premiered at South by Southwest Film Festival called The Age of Disclosure. The basis of the movie is the fact not only that we've had these crashed extraterrestrial spacecraft, but that we've been trying for 80 years to reverse engineer them. And this is really interesting because I've heard this previously, that basically we're not succeeding at it. Basically, they figured out a few things, but for all practical purposes, we haven't succeeded at it because there's an arms race, secret Cold War arms race, because everyone realizes the first country that actually figures this stuff out will rule the world militarily. And so because of that, that's the reason it's been so under wraps. That's the reason the Pentagon does not want to tell the public. It's not that they don't want the public to know per se. It's just that it's imperative that they win this arms race, because if we don't win it, we're basically at the behest of the other country that does. And there's only two other countries that have the resources and also the means and opportunity to plow through this stuff, and that's China and Russia. And at this point, I would almost not conclude Russia. It's supposedly they've got their hands on some of this pretty good crashed hardware, apparently. Now, this is really weird, but there's a rumor, there's been a rumor going on for years that even Iran has this, which is one of the reasons that Iran gets more. Some people say that's the clandestine reason Iran gets more military respect than they actually deserve, is that they have one of these things. So whoever figures it out. But as far as I can tell, and I don't really know the answer to this question. I really don't, because Jazz Shaw and I talked about this all the time, because he said he didn't know either. He got conflicting reports from the Pentagon that we've reverse engineered some of it, and we can't figure any of it out at all. I've contended that those Tic Tac things that the Nimitz saw in 2004 and that the Roosevelt saw in 2015 off of Catalina Island, I think most, if not all, those things are actually ours. I do, but they exist because we've reverse engineered alien technology. Now, what Bob Lazar said, of course, Lazar wasn't in. He wasn't in Area 51. That was like in the 1990s. So I mean, you're talking about now well over 30 years. But he said at that time too, his job was to try to reverse engineer this stuff, and he said we hadn't really figured out yet either. But we learned to fly the craft we had. That they had actually figured out. They had figured out how to fly the extraterrestrial spacecraft they had acquired. And supposedly some of it wasn't all that damaged. I mean, there seems to be some evidence, if you want to call it evidence, or there seems to be some connotation or inference or implication. What am I looking for? About the fact that some alien either just gave it to us so we could look at them. Now whether there was an exchange there, whether they sat down and gave us the keys, or whether they just parked it somewhere where we could find it. We never. I don't know. I know only one thing, which I've said over and over again, and that is we have in our possession, that would be the U.S. government, at least 6 and probably 9 or more crashed extraterrestrial spacecraft. That's the only thing I'm certain of. I don't know whether Eisenhower met with the aliens. I don't know if they sat down and gave us one of these things. I don't know any of that stuff. I don't. But I know we have these things. I know that. There's too much damn evidence. Just too much. That's what I know. So anyway, yeah, I'm going to post the link to this article in Popular Mechanics about, and also I'm going to see if I can get one of the people who appeared in this article on as a guest too, about how they go about or would go about reverse engineering this stuff. So it's a fascinating article. Well, if you're a dork like me, well, who doesn't have a life? Okay, we're going to wrap it up for tonight. You didn't call, fuck you. Yeah, that's my story. I'm sticking to it. So I've been talking for a while. I want to thank Leigh Richardson. No, I forgot to mention this again. It's terrible. I didn't mention this at the top of the show. I didn't mention at the top of part 2. Tomorrow night, Sina McCullough, the medical correspondent for the Epoch Times, is going to be joining us, and we're going to be talking about the bird flu in particular, and basically just like a regular wellness and stuff, and how to take care of yourself, and how you can not die tomorrow or next week or something like that. First time on the show. We have a lot of people from the Epoch Times on. They're great. We have kind of a publicity in there, which is a reason, and they like us. They keep pushing people to us, and that's fine. That's good. That's good. Folks, we are batting way above our pay grade here for what we got going on. I really appreciate that in terms of the type of guests we get, and I appreciate that very much. I really do. So let me get this off the screen here. There we go. That's my big head. Oh my God, how'd that happen? So yeah, Sina McCullough tomorrow night. Next week, I know we have Larry Newman, our friend Bale Bodsman, and Bigfoot Hunter. He's on Wednesday. And Leigh Richardson is coming back for a last interview about her book on Thursday. And I don't know who we have Monday or Tuesday, but we'll have somebody. We'll figure that out. So tomorrow night, I'll see you. Good night, Esperanza. Good night, Uncle Donnie. And good night to you wherever you are. You guys have a nice evening. I'll see you tomorrow night. Take care.